I'm with John Munayer from the Rossing Centre for Education and Dialogue. John, what is a Rossington Centre?
So the Rossing Centre for Education and Dialogue is both a interreligious organization and a peace-building organization. It's based in Jerusalem, but it has programs all in different cities and towns in the Holy Land. And it specifically focuses on building the desire and capacity of both Israelis, Palestinians, Jews, Christians, Muslims, and other religious groups to live in a more equal and inclusive society.
When were you started and why were you started?
So the history of the organization is a bit more complex. It was founded in 2004 as the Jerusalem Center for Jewish and Christian Relations. So originally, the organization had a specific niche and focus on the relationship between Jews and Christians here in the Holy Land, because there was a need to help with dialogue and education between these two communities, because their relationship is very different to what people tend to call typical sort of Christian-Jewish relations, where Christians are the majority and Jews are the minority. Here, it's the opposite. Christians are the minority and Jews are the majority. And of course, the local Christians here are Palestinians, so that adds another element to that complex relationship. And therefore, the organization originally, as it was founded by Daniel Rossing, right, the late Daniel Rossing, this was the focus. But when Daniel Rossing passed away, sadly, in 2010, and then in 2013, we had our new director, who's our current director, Dr. Sarah Bernstein. She decided that we needed to focus not just on Jewish-Christian relations, but all the different religious, ethnic, and national groups. So we still have a program that focuses on Jewish-Christian relations here in the land. So that is a program within the organization, but it's not its main focus. And now we work with all groups. So this is sort of where the Rossing Center is at the moment.
And tell us a bit about some of the programs that you run.
So our programs are divided into our educational programs and our dialogical programs. When it comes to education, we work in the Israeli Ministry of Education trying to teach and train teachers to deal with conflictual conversations in the classroom, how to deal with racism in the classroom or any form of xenophobia in the classroom. So we train teachers both in schools and in teacher training colleges. So that's sort of our main work when it comes to education. And we also have a twinning program where we bring a Christian school and a Jewish school, but of course in the Christian schools, usually it's 50-50 in terms of Christian and Muslim students. We pair these schools and then we have 4 encounters between these schools. So it's both also with the children themselves. And then in our dialogical programs, we try to work in what we call mixed cities or mixed spaces. So we work in Jerusalem and specifically in the city of Ramleh, where we bring together university students and they go through a series of meetings and joint study sessions, and then eventually also they organize and run their own programs and activities for the general public to sort of encourage respect, understanding, dialogue, inclusive values and equality.
Is there a lot of suspicion between the faiths?
There are some suspicion between the faiths, and of course, this is not just related to theology and religious identity, but at times also has to do with the conflict itself. So everything is intertwined here in this context. So, Christians might be suspicious of, as being a minority within a minority perhaps, or being, a minority amongst 2 religious majorities. So there might be suspicion there as how do you work together? The same for the Jewish religious communities, there might be sometimes suspicion, and the same for Muslims. And at times, there might be just general personal suspicions that people have with meeting other people from different groups. So yeah, they tend to sometimes relate to theology, but sometimes they also relate to just the political context or just personal preferences. Sometimes we have one of our recurring challenges is in our twinning program where we twin 2 schools together, a Palestinian and an Israeli one. They visit a church, a mosque, and a synagogue. And sometimes for these students, or more accurately for their parents, they're not always comfortable sending their children to one of these religious sort of worship places. And it can come also from suspicion of why are we taking them to this place? Is there a fear or suspicion of us trying to convert them to one religion or another? Even though we have no interest as an organization in converting anyone to anything. We have Muslim, Jews, and Christians in our staff. Some are more religious, some are completely secular. So yeah, there's many different challenges and suspicion that arise.
Is it difficult to bring different religions together in the middle of conflict. So if there's a specific situation happening, does that make people very defensive?
Absolutely. It can be challenging as it is to bring different religious groups together. But if you add to it a very, very tense, violent, controversial conflict like we have here in Palestine, Israel, then that obviously makes things even more complicated. And I think it's also true for other contexts, in Europe or even in the UK, where political conversations will enter interfaith sort of circles or frameworks. And it immediately makes things much more controversial and challenging. And oftentimes, as a peace-building and interreligious organization here in the Holy Land, we often get requests from interreligious groups abroad for us to help them deal with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in their meetings, because they don't know how to deal with it. And usually Palestine and Israel, they tend to be the most controversial topics for interreligious dialogue events abroad. So,
is there a lot of rhetoric within the conflict, things that maybe aren't necessarily true, but they're pushed as truth?
Yeah, I mean, in every conflict, there's a lot of narratives. Not all tend to be completely based on what one might say sort of historical evidence or facts. Or people will have narratives that have certain elements of truth in their narratives and decide to ignore other elements. So narratives can be very selective, and historical narratives can be used really for motivating people into action, whether that be good action or bad action. So of course, there's a lot of rhetoric, a lot of narratives, a lot of terminology that is used by many groups for specific purposes. So this is always something we also need to try and bridge, is how do we bridge some of these historical, religious narratives when there's, people coming from such different backgrounds.
Tell us a bit about Know Your Neighbor.
So one of our activities, sort of small side programs, at the Rossing Center, is we've provided an online resource, which is on our website, where you can find material in English, Arabic, and Hebrew about the different religious and ethnic communities in the Holy Land. Because what we've experienced is that if you sort of just write in Google, search in Google a specific religious community or ethnic community, there isn't always credible information about them, or there might be information that is written with a specific agenda behind it. And what we're trying to do is create resources for both Arabic, Hebrew, and English speakers about the different faith communities and ethnic communities here in the Holy Land. So we actually get thousands of people all around the Middle East, and not just the Middle East, but around the world, who use that platform to learn about the communities.
It is conflict in the land. Do people need counseling?
Yeah, I think, the conflict and violence create trauma, and people here are deeply, deeply traumatized. And
how does that show itself out in society?
People are extremely fearful. People do not know how to sort of almost control themselves and deal with their emotions in a healthy way. And this can also at times affect family relations. So people are deeply traumatized. They're deeply scared. They might be depressed because of the situation as well. So counseling is something that is very much needed here. We don't do it at the Rossing Center. We focus on education and dialogue. But I think that also counseling, and one might also say therapy, is very much needed for the people in this land.
Have people come into the program and over the months and years you've seen a complete change in their life, and do you have stories of people changed?
Yeah, absolutely. We have many stories of people who have changed their lives and stories. Just yesterday I met a participant who was trained by one of my colleagues, and he literally said, she changed my life, because she showed me how the situation here is much more complicated, how he's an Israeli Jew, and he was a very hardcore right-winger. And after meeting my colleague and going through her sort of educational program, he realized how he was brought up on a very specific narrative that, excluded the other, and she helped him sort of rethink his vision for the land. So that was quite nice to hear from him literally yesterday. But we have all sorts of stories of people who are very resentful, hateful, and come out of our programs with a very different perspective. That is not to say that everyone goes through our programs and is completely transformed and changed, but we do have people who go through transformation, and we also do a lot of evaluation of our programs to understand how we've impacted the participants. So we usually do an internal evaluation, but we often bring in external evaluators to come and interview the participants, build a survey for the participants for us to understand how we're impacting the participants and how we can get better in our method, in our content, in our execution. So it's always quite nice to hear these types of stories. Or I think we had a student who at the age of 10 participated in our twinning program and is now training to be a teacher and wants the program in her school. She's Palestinian. So it's always nice to hear these stories.
Yeah. Is it exciting bringing people together?
It is. It is exciting to bring people together, but it's also very, very challenging. So it's not always the easiest route, and sometimes people don't need to meet each other. And it's important first to work sort of just within your own group before you meet the other group. So we also are constantly thinking together as staff. Do we only bring the groups together? Do we work also in what we call a uni-national framework or a uni-religious framework before we bring all the different identities together? It's exciting because people go through different processes and ask difficult questions and open up and share. So it is very much exciting.
Is it difficult because a lot of this is religious and in some ways you're asking people to not to deny their religion but to deny some of the feelings that they think about the religious point of views?
I mean, we ask program participants to bring themselves to the table with all their different identities, and it's also their religious identity. So, if you're a Palestinian Christian, we want you to bring your Palestinian identity. We want to bring your Christian identity. And if you're a man or a woman, your gender identity, or if you come from a specific town, that identity. And if you're a teacher, so bring your identity as a teacher. And if you're a father, bring that identity as well. So we ask participants to bring themselves, because we're never just Christian or Muslim or Jewish or something else. We always have much more that we bring to the table. So we don't ask them to deny anything, actually. We ask them to bring themselves as they are and to be as honest as possible and to ask the questions they've always wanted to ask a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew, and not to shy away from these types of conversations, because this is why we're here, is to explore and to learn and to be in fellowship and to perhaps challenge some of our stereotypes, or even to challenge some of our political opinions and to challenge our theological opinions, because we believe that through encounter, through engaging with the other, you can become sort of a better person yourself. So as a Christian, you can become a better Christian when you meet a Muslim and a Jew, because you learn about yourself through the other. Yeah, and then of course we're trying to create a vision and projects that would advance the human rights and equality of all people in the land.
Why do you do what you do?
I personally do it because of my specific background, being a Palestinian Christian who also has a lot of Muslim, Christian, Jewish friends here in the land. I deeply care for them, and I want to create an alternative to what we have here. But also because of my faith as a Christian. I believe that God calls us to be ambassadors of reconciliation, that He calls us to love our neighbors, to love our enemies, and therefore I refuse to hate anyone, whether they be Jewish, Muslim, Christian. Sometimes as Christians can hate each other, and we do that pretty well. And so I refuse to do that, and I believe that this is sort of my calling as well as a Christian, to be a bridge for the different communities here, and that's what motivates me.
What's your website, Facebook page for people who'd like to know more?
So our Facebook is the Rossing Centre for Education and Dialogue, and our website is www.rossingcentre.org. So you're more than welcome to follow us on social media or sign up to our newsletter.
Okay, John, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.